Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the globe you are joining from. If this is your first time here, you are most welcome. This is WAiC, Women Academics in Construction, a capacity building network principally for women and postgraduate students in the built environment. WAiC is basically about supporting women, helping them to advance in their career, providing support in terms of collaboration, networking, mentoring, and basic skills that they need as they advance in their career. So the WAiC idea started sometimes last year, and by tomorrow, March 29, WAiC will be one. So by tomorrow, we'll be one in this initiative. And since we started this, we have had several exciting and informative sessions. And today, we equally have another great, exciting and informative webinar. Today, the focus of our webinar is grantsmanship for academics in the built environment. And grantsmanship simply is is the art of acquiring grants through writing. And you will find that grantsmanship is a critical component of our career as academics. If we must do research that is important, research that is groundbreaking, research that is off the shelf, research that has life applicable social, economic, and environmental outcome, grant is the way to go. And again, we find that on a year-on basis, the budgets or allocation for grants are becoming slimmer. And that means that the process of acquiring grants has become stiffer and has become more competitive. And that's why we feel that it is important that we learn the art of grant writing, because it plays a very critical role for us as academics, enhancing our work and also showcasing our work as researchers. And today we have a very distinguished personality come speak to us today. He's distinguished in many fronts, but particularly because when it comes to grants and grant writing, he's one that has proven results to show. He's someone that has the art, he has the experience, and also has secured over 150 million US dollars worth of grants attracted to himself from different sources. And so you all agree with me that he's someone that we have just picked the right person to mentor us today on this topic. And I'm talking about no other person than Professor Chime Anumba. And at the appropriate time, he will be introduced. But Prof, would like to say that we are thankful and grateful to you for obliging us, for honoring us with your presence, despite your very tight schedule. We are very grateful and we do not take this for granted. And to the rest of us,
thank you very much.
Yes, sir. For the rest of us, I would like to say, relax and have a great time. Thank you. So we'll have Vicky. Vicky, can you please read out Prof's bio?
Good afternoon, everybody here on the platform. Please, my name is Victoria Mami Friyekuma. I'm currently a postgraduate student at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. I'm offering construction management, a master's course in construction management. So I'm going ahead with the reading of the bio. Professor Chime Anumba is Dean of the College of Design, Construction and Planning at the University of Florida. He holds a PhD in Civil Engineering from the University of Leeds, UK, a higher doctorate from Loughborough University, UK, and an honorary doctorate from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. He has over 500 scientific publications, including 21 books and over 200 archival journal papers on aspects of construction engineering and informatics. His work has received over $150 million in support from a variety of sources. He has also supervised more than 54 doctoral candidates to completion and mentored over 25 postdoctoral researchers. In 2018, he was named the recipient of the ASCE Computing in Civil Engineering Award. He's a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering and a member of the US National Academy of Construction. Thank you.
Prof, sir, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I will try to keep this interactive and conversational. I intend to go through a reasonably short presentation, and then there'll be a lot of time for questions. But if you do feel like interrupting and asking a question, please indicate by raising your hand or typing something in the chat, and then I'll try to respond as we go along. So first I'll share my screen just so you can follow what I'm doing. Okay, so I've been asked to speak about grantsmanship for academics in the built environment. And so what I propose to do is to first talk about the fact that we have numerous types of grant proposals. And then I'll focus specifically on PhD proposals and then also proposals for research grants. I'm including PhD proposals because I do know that we have some that are students, but also some that might be writing proposals specifically for securing support for PhD students. But you can write grant proposals for research purposes, for educational purposes, as well as community development and a number of other areas. But I'll focus specifically on the last two, PhD proposals and proposals for research grants. Okay, so with regard to PhD proposals, the question usually is why should you write a PhD proposal? And typically for a number of students, it may be simply to clarify the focus of the research. And for others, it may be to convince a potential university or supervisor to take you on. And in many cases, it's also to secure sponsorship, in which case you are really trying to convince somebody to fund your PhD work. And then there are many other reasons why you may want to do that. So, but typically, what should we include in a PhD proposal? And I should also say up front that some of the elements of PhD proposals you will also find when I start to talk about research grant proposals. Typically, you have to have some sort of a background or context, which is really addressing the question, why is this area important? And then secondly, you need to talk about what's the related work. So what else has been done so far, by whom, and what gaps exist? And so typically for doctoral level work, you're looking at what we sometimes refer to as the point of departure. And so the point of departure is that point where you have established the boundaries of current research or current knowledge, and then you're setting out to find out something new that others will now regard as a contribution. And so really you have to have a statement of what is the overall aim of the PhD research, and usually should not be more than one sentence that captures the essence of what you're trying to do. And then you have to have a number of specific objectives. And so these are the specific issues you need to tackle in order to achieve the goal. And again, I try to encourage people to keep it manageable, no more than 3 to 5 objectives. because these are the things that should drive the research. Very often people tend to ask about how do objectives relate to research questions and to hypotheses. And I think that what I try to say is make sure that whatever you do, you're consistent with it. Because I've seen people have 3 or 4 objectives, and then they have another 3 or 4 research questions, and then they propose 4 or 5 additional hypotheses, and none of those are tied together. So you need to be sure that these are all well tied together, or simply stick to one approach, which is either stick to aim and objectives, so research questions or hypothesis, and follow that all the way through the research. And then you need to put a description of the research program and method. So you translate the objectives typically into work packages. And for each of those work packages, you need to specify what are the tasks that you need to undertake, what are the methods that you will use to undertake the tasks, and then what are the outputs that will come out of those, and then also what are the time scales within which you will produce those outputs. And usually you have some sort of a schedule or Gantt chart or program that clearly maps all these things out and identifies what are the overlaps and what are the dependencies between each of those work packages. And usually you have to include references. The number of issues to remember is it's always good to have a working title because that helps you to capture what is the essence of what you're trying to do. But also know that that title could change. I think my PhD title actually changed 2 or 3 times. And I did not decide on the final one until I had actually written the final thesis. So you need to remember that the proposal is an important document. It can make the difference between whether you get support for your project and whether you actually, in some cases, if it's prior to admission into a PhD program, whether you actually do get admitted. And in many cases, it's delivered within your first year of the PhD program and can make a difference between whether they allow you to continue or whether you have to look at alternative things to do. So it is a dynamic document, and once you've developed it, then it's likely to change over the course of the project. And it's usually a statement of intent, and it's not a full research output. The full research output is when you actually have the thesis delivered. And so being a statement of intent, that also reinforces the fact that things will change as you conduct the research. It should be properly referenced, so people need to know where you're drawing the ideas from, and then also what are the other works that are supporting your arguments. And I say it should not be too long. The length varies depending on the different countries and at what stage in your PhD journey you are. In some cases, it could be as short as 2 or 3 pages. In other cases, typically when you're already within a PhD program, it could be as long as 50 to 100 pages, depending on how much literature you actually include in that. So that's just a little bit about PhD proposals. I'll now switch over to proposals for research grants, which I think is the main topic that I'm supposed to speak on, but I just wanted to shed some light on PhD proposals at the outset. So the question is, why develop proposals for funding? And I think, as has already been said in the introduction, it is an important, increasingly important part of being an academic. And so one of the first reasons is you have this burning idea and you really do want to undertake this exciting research, but you don't have the resources to do that. And so being able to secure funding would allow you to do that. And from that point of view is very important. Another is to generate research income for a lot of universities. It's one of the metrics for many universities. And so the university and all of the constituent units need to continue to generate research income, which also boosts their reputation and their ranking. And then for many academics, you do need the funds to hire or retain your key researchers and students in order to continue to support them. And that is very important as well. And then I've added the last one here, which is really tongue-in-cheek, but is it simply to get the boss off your back? So maybe your boss has been saying you need to write grants, you need to bring in some funding, and you're writing the proposals, just get them off your back. I don't think that is a good enough reason because it does not sustain you through making sure that you actually are successful with that. And so developing grant proposals, you need to think about what are the funding bodies, what are the funding agencies that would actually fund the research. In some cases, it could be internal funding agencies like your own university. For example, here at the University of Florida, we often have what we call seed funds, typically for new assistant professors, and in some cases, even for some students. Where they apply for internal fund to carry out a small bit of research or to do some preliminary work based on which they'll now go to external funding agencies. And then the external agencies vary in terms of who they are, what level of funding they can give, and also what their requirements are. So you could have government departments. For example, here in the US, we get a lot of funding from the US Department of Energy. You could also have funding agencies that are research agencies like the National Science Foundation. In the UK, we had EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council. They also have the Social Science Research Council, Social and Economic Research Council, and a number of other similar funding agencies. And then industry, you can get money from industry, from companies or industry organizations, and they have their own specific requirements. I should say that industry and industry organizations tend to fund more development work than research. In other words, they tend to fund research that is not blue sky, but kind of close application. And then, of course, we have a number of charitable foundations that also support research. So there's a variety of external funding agencies, and how you develop your proposal depends on who you are applying to. So what are the key considerations in developing research proposals? The first thing I've put down here is to have a pool of ideas. What that means is that sometimes it's not when you sit down in front of your computer and you think, okay, I must write a research proposal, that the best ideas come to you. You need to make notes as ideas pop into your head. You could wake up at 3 a.m. and you have this bright idea, and it's always good to have a notepad or just record something on your phone that reminds you of the idea. But you just need to continue to collect ideas, because some of those that sound actually quite wacky may end up being some of your best ideas. But if you don't make a note of them, then you can quite easily lose them as well. The second thing is to understand the requirements of the funding bodies and to make sure you follow them. Lots of proposals are not funded simply because people have not followed the guidelines. If they say it has to be a limit of 10 pages, make sure you don't submit 11 pages. If they say there's a standard format, make sure you follow the standard format. And make sure you cover every element of their requirements. If they say, for example, you need industry participation and you need letters of support, make sure that you also have those. So a lot of people don't get funded simply because they ignore some of the technicalities of the funding agency requirements, and that can be a real problem. Third point is you need to avoid last-minute proposal writing. So don't leave it till the last minute, because if things go wrong, you'll end up missing the deadline. I've had a lot of colleagues who have worked really hard, and then at the last minute have not been able to submit the proposal. I've had one similar experience. We did everything, and then when we got to the point of hitting the submit button, we found that the server at the funding agency had crashed. And so after months of putting together this proposal, we just found we ended up not being able to submit. And we had to wait another 6 months, and in some cases, it could be as long as a year to be able to wait for the next opening of the call for proposals in order to submit. And then seek advice from peers and senior colleagues. Talk to those that have been successful with those particular agencies you're applying to, and then get the advice and make sure you incorporate those in your proposals. When I started out, I spent a lot of time developing ideas, and I was fortunate to have a lot of people that were supportive, and they were not necessarily at my own university, but they would read through my draft proposals, give me feedback, and then I will refine the proposal. And that helped me tremendously because I knew that at the point when I had to submit the proposals, they were much better than my initial idea. Secondly, look at successful and unsuccessful examples. And you have to build bridges with colleagues in order to be able to do this. Some colleagues are very willing to share, others are not. So look at what actually constitutes a successful proposal to a particular agency. Look at it carefully. What do you think made it successful? How does it relate to your ideas, and what other proposal ideas or what proposal drafts you have produced? And then others may be willing to share their unsuccessful proposals as well as the feedback that they received from the funding agency. And you can learn as much from those as you can learn from the successful proposals. So that's very important. And then second, the other point is to make sure you budget carefully. Do not promise more than you can do with the budget available. So many funding agencies have a limit on the budget. Some would say we can only fund proposals of, say, 250,000. So make sure that you don't cram in work that requires 500,000 into 250,000 just to impress them, because if you finally get a project, you may not be able to execute. And then you end up having a bad reputation because it's recorded that you received the funding, but was not able to complete all that you said you were going to do. Another important thing is to pay attention to the methods and the research program. The significant proportion of the evaluation of proposals is really looking at the proposed methods to see if they're actually appropriate for the tasks proposed. Can these investigators accomplish what they're setting out to do using the methods that they have proposed? And then the other part of it is the program or the schedule. Can you do this in the time available? Because again, all of those, you can either overpromise or underpromise, and you need to balance those pretty well. And this is where having senior colleagues that can look at these things becomes very helpful. The other thing I encourage people to do is to put themselves in the reviewer's position. So think about it objectively. Does this sound like a credible proposal? Do the ideas flow? Do they make sense? And if you were reviewing this as an independent person, would you fund it? And I think that's very important. And I'll come back to that in a little while. The other point to make is that it is competitive. So what that means is that you don't just need a good proposal. The quality that's required has to be better than good, because you're competing against others. So it has to be the very highest quality that you can put together. And in many cases, I've seen very wonderful proposals not get funded simply because there were others that were just a little bit better. And so you can have a very good proposal, but it doesn't get funded simply because you have one or two others that were better. And there are a number of other considerations which I'll come back to. Okay, so going on to what actually goes into a grant proposal. A lot of it depends on the funder's requirements. And this is where you need to study the call for proposals very carefully and make sure that you address each and every element of their requirements. And the major research funding agencies have set requirements and set templates in many cases that you need to follow. For example, the National Science Foundation would typically want to see elements of things on this slide. There needs to be some sort of a background or problem statement. What exactly is the problem that you want to address? That needs to be very clearly stated and very importantly backed up by references and citations of previous or related work. Something else that needs to be very clear is what is the scientific or intellectual merit of the proposal. So what new knowledge is going to be created by undertaking this work? And in many cases, what is the technological relevance if you are trying to apply new technologies that address problems in construction? The National Science Foundation in the US typically would want to see, and I think this is important for many other agencies as well, preliminary results. So what have you done in this area relative to what you are proposing to do? And typically in the UK, there's a section on what they call previous research and track record, which again is making the case for you. I have done related work in this area and I have the capacity to do this. My previous work has shown that this is the next thing to address. And I think that that's very important. And also, as it's important to have a very clear research plan. And this is where you break down the overall project into your detailed aim and objectives and work packages, and also what are the methods that you will use to accomplish each and every one of those tasks. And then either integrated with the research plan or as a separate section, you would typically need to outline what are the outputs and the deliverables that will come out of the research. So what are you going to deliver at the end of the research? And these need to be tangible, clear outputs. In some cases, it could be a model, it could be a paper, it could be a piece of software, it could be just a survey, or so it needs to be something that is tangible. I need to clearly outline what these deliverables will be. And that kind of leads into the next point, which is dissemination and exploitation. This is where you talk about how are you going to disseminate the results of the research? And how will these results be exploited? And depending on the funding agency, you'll need to tailor your coverage of this section appropriately. The standard method in many academic research endeavors is paper publications. Now, paper publications are important, but they're not the only disseminations. So it's sometimes important to talk about being able to make presentations to appropriate industry groups. Maybe have a website that documents and disseminates the outcomes of the research. All of these are methods to disseminate the research, presentations at conferences, and so on. And then exploitation is really more of how will these outputs be taken further. In some cases, for example, if you have a piece of prototype software, you can talk about plans to look at how to get it adopted in industry or to market it and turn it into a commercial product, those sorts of things. And those are important for those agencies that fund near market research. Again, some agencies like the NSF will ask you to talk about broader impacts. Broader impacts in the UK, they talk about relevance to beneficiaries. Broader impacts is really where you talk about how this research would affect society at large. An element of that is how will others build on what you have done in the research. Some of it could relate to how do you reach younger people wanting to come into the industry, into construction. Are you able to reach out to schools? Are you able to involve underrepresented groups in the field, and are you able to make this a platform for people outside of the construction industry to learn from what we are doing? So there are so many different dimensions of that. One of the really neat examples that I've seen was work done by some of my colleagues here in the University of Florida in our urban and regional planning department. They worked on a project with a local community. And one of the ways they tried to do this outreach bit was to write a small story book for kids, which kind of introduced planning concepts to them in a very simple and accessible way. And again, you need to be very creative to try to think of lots of different ways to have these broader impacts. And then usually you have some section on project management and resources. This is where you talk about how you will manage the project. And so in this section, typically you'll say things about how regularly you would meet as a research team, and then how often you will meet if you have any advisory board, how you would coordinate the work between the different tasks and between the different researchers involved, and also have some statement as to how many researchers and for what periods and what money and other resources you need to successfully carry out the project. And then you need to have a very clear research schedule with milestones and very clear overlap between the tasks. And it needs to be something that it's actually workable, but also logical. And obviously you have to have a section on references that support all of these elements of the research. Okay, so additional important notes to mention. One is to ensure you do your homework. What that means is that you've done some literature review, you've tried to understand what else has been done in the area, and you don't just have an idea and you rush to write a proposal without clearly understanding what else has been done, and forgetting that somebody in some other corner of the world might have done something that you're not aware of. So make sure you do your homework. And I encourage people to develop their research ideas independent of deadline. Sometimes when you're under a lot of pressure with looming deadlines, you don't always do your best work in terms of developing your proposal. And then I already talked about getting senior colleagues as advisors. So find appropriate mentors who are a lot more experienced and can help you by reading your drafts. Some mentors in some universities would insist on being co-investigators. I don't think they should be all the time, only if they have stuff to contribute. And so don't allow yourself to be bullied into having them as co-investigators. I think that in many cases, if they are going to be making a significant contribution to the proposal, then it's good to have them as co-investigators. But if not, you just need them to advise you if they are not contributing to the proposal and the project. That doesn't have to be the case. Find collaborators, and they don't have to be in your institution. They could be in other institutions. They could be in other disciplines. So you need to find whoever is able and willing to contribute to the proposed project. And I think it's important that they're also a key participant to the writing of the proposal. There are people who would want to lend their names to the proposal, but don't want to do any work. I would just encourage you not to carry any passengers. Anybody who is part of the proposal needs to actively contribute. And then align your proposal to the call for proposal. And I put in bracket there, follow the money. And that is also based on some previous experience. What I'm trying to say there is that you can have a wonderful idea, but the call for proposal, the specific call for proposals you are looking at may not be the best fit for your idea. So you need to find another research program that will fund the idea. But then in other cases, you may have a great idea and the call for proposals is broad enough that you can tailor your idea to be aligned with that in order to be considered under that initiative. And I have an example of a program in the UK that was called by the EPSRC, called the Innovative Manufacturing Initiative. And one of the key elements of that was something called construction as a manufacturing process. And so a lot of researchers working in construction management had a lot of ideas, and were successful at getting funded. But there were those in some of the more traditional disciplines like materials and structures that did not have a lot of success in that program. But I remember there were some professors who were very successful because they aligned their work in other areas to fit that program. So one example was a professor that did work in concrete materials and structures who tied his research to high-strength concrete, which could be develop strength really quickly and can allow the construction process to move more quickly. So it was kind of more fast-track construction. But at the end of the day, the bulk of the research was still associated with concrete. But tailoring his idea to the construction as a manufacturing process was very important and allowed him to get some funding. Okay, so so that is very important. We need to be sure that we align that. And then it may take several attempts. Very few people get the proposal funded the first time. And so I will say you need to persevere, you need to look at the review feedback carefully, refine your proposal and send it back in. Some agencies will give you about 6 months to resubmit, and others would actually bar you from resubmitting after 1 or 2 attempts. So you need to look at what the rules are, but again, make sure you take the review feedback very seriously and try to address whatever shortcomings they have identified. And then the best way to know what is a good proposal is to be on the inside. So volunteer to be a proposal reviewer. Tell the funding agency program directors you'd like to be a reviewer. And then when you're a reviewer, you'll get sent lots of proposals to review. You'll get to be part of the panel that makes decisions on proposals. And from that process, you learn very quickly what constitutes a good proposal and what constitutes a bad proposal. And that is one very important way to learn. again, I tell my PhD students that the best way to learn how to write papers is to read a lot of papers, and then also to offer to be reviewers for journal. Because once you start doing that, you start to see how people express themselves, you start to see how some of these decisions are made, and then you very, very quickly become a pretty good proposal writer. And the final point on this slide is to explore what I call undersubscribed funding sources. A lot of people rush to the typical funding agencies for their field of research, but there may be other agencies that not a lot of people know about. And so you need to search for those and try to apply to those. For a lot of the major funding agencies, the success rate is typically 10 to 15%. But some of the programs that are not well known may have funding success rates of up to 25%. So you need to really look at search for different funding sources and see how to address them. So these are just a few tips. Yeah, moving on to kind of wrap up this presentation part. I would say that securing grant funding is very important for built environment academics. It does require consistent quality effort. You don't write one proposal each year and then think that level of effort will get you funded. If you think about it, if the funding success rate is 10%, 1 in 10, you probably need to write 10 proposals to secure one. And so it's not something that you do on an ad hoc basis. You need to persevere and work really hard. And sometimes it can produce unexpected outcomes. I've had a proposal that I developed and it went out to 5 reviewers. I did not to fund the proposal. And until today, I still don't know why that happens sometimes. And sometimes it's local politics kicking in. It could just be, I don't know what. Other times I put in proposals that I thought were good, works both ways.